Welcome to the Community Air Protection Program online training series. This is the fifth module in a series providing training on community emissions reduction programs. Today's training is all about tracking progress. Defining clear metrics and providing regular updates are critical to ensuring community emission reduction programs are successful. In this training, we'll cover why metrics and annual reporting are important, what makes a good metric, what kinds of things a community emissions reduction program should track, and what annual reports contain. Metrics and annual reporting are how we track progress, and they help us ensure that emissions reduction programs achieve their objectives. Metrics are a suite of indicators that document progress. For example, a metric could be how many tons of air pollution were reduced because of a new regulation. Annual reports are progress updates that air districts must provide each year to let the public know how things are going and what changes may be needed. Combined, these components can be used to evaluate the implementation of a community emissions reduction program. They help tell us whether what we are doing is working. They provide transparency and accountability to the process as a whole, and with regular updates, offer an opportunity to identify any issues and make any necessary corrections. Now we'll talk a bit more about each of these important topics. There are a lot of different ways to evaluate progress for a community emissions reduction program, and no single metric can demonstrate success on its own. Community emissions reduction programs should track a range of different aspects of the program annually, including emissions, goals, strategies, interagency coordination, investments, enforcement, and public engagement. In addition to these annual metrics, community emissions reduction programs include metrics to track exposure to air pollution at the 5-year time frame. Identifying individual metrics to track progress in each of these areas and others can help paint a fuller picture of how things are going in the community. There are lots of different ways to track progress, so what makes a good metric? The best ones will be specific and measurable. The more specific something is, the easier it will be to track. Metrics should be tied to strategies that have been identified through the steering committee process. This means that when we look at any individual strategy, we should know which changes it could create and how our metrics will reflect those changes. It is important to identify the data source for a metric so that it is clear how tracking will actually occur. And finally, the metrics should be identified through a collaborative process and be community-focused. Different communities may want to focus on different issues. Now that we know what makes a good metric, let's talk through some examples of metrics that could be used in a community emissions reduction program. Let's start with emissions, or the amount of air pollution, which is the focus of the community emissions reduction program. Example metrics could be the tons per year of particulate matter reduced, or tons per year of benzene reduced. Metrics on goals will depend on what goals were selected. Remember, goals help define the vision for what changes we want to see, while our strategies define what actions we'll take to get there. Example metrics to track progress on goals could include the number of zero-emission buses put in service in the community or the number of residential wood stoves replaced. There are many ways to track progress on investments. For example, we could measure the amount of money spent on cleaner vehicles in a community or on air filtration. We could also look at how much funding was leveraged from other sources to drive additional investments in the community. Enforcement metrics could include things like the number and type of inspections conducted, compliance rates for specific rules, or the number of violations issued to pollution sources in the community. Tracking strategy status is very important to make sure they are being implemented. Metrics could include whether a public workshop has been conducted, draft regulatory concepts released, or if a regulation has been adopted. Ongoing community participation is fundamental to successful implementation. Some potential metrics to track engagement could be the number of public meetings and attendees, and the number of active steering committee members. In many communities, coordination with other agencies like land use and transportation agencies will be important to reducing exposure. Metrics to track these efforts could include the number of meetings with city staff or the number of comment letters written on proposed projects or plans with recommendations for exposure reduction strategies and cleaner technologies. Finally, at the 5-year mark, community emissions reduction programs will need to evaluate exposure to air pollution, going beyond emissions and other metrics. Examples of ways to track exposure include measuring concentrations of air pollutants like PM2.5 or conducting air quality modeling to estimate health risk. These examples, and the rest of the examples in the blueprint, are just some ideas for metrics to provide a starting place. It will be up to the steering committee to work together to define metrics for their community. Steering committees should work through each strategy included in their plans and assign specific metrics to evaluate progress. All of this work to define metrics will support annual reporting. Annual reports are very important for transparency and accountability and are key mechanisms to track progress. Air districts have to provide a public report by October 1st of each year. As part of this process, they will post this report on the Air District website, issue a public notice to make sure everyone is aware that the report is out, and hold a public hearing to provide an opportunity for the public and the Air District Board to weigh in on progress. CARB will review these reports and make recommendations on any changes needed. The blueprint identifies several things that annual reports should include: status of the strategies included in the program, status of the metrics for tracking progress, changes to the community profile, like changes in demographics or socioeconomic issues, a qualitative assessment of the progress to date, a discussion of any planned changes to the program, updates on any implementation milestones identified during the plan development or approval process, and an indication of the completion of any required program elements. Collectively, these reports should paint a comprehensive picture of progress in the community and upcoming efforts. Thank you for watching this online training focused on metrics to track progress in annual reporting for community emission reduction programs. For more information, please visit our website.